One of the most important storytelling techniques implemented in Psycho is the soundtrack. The film was scored by legendary composer Bernard Hermann, who had previously worked with Hitchcock on titles like Vertigo, North by Northwest, and The Man Who Knew Too Much. But I think that the collaboration that yielded the most success was Psycho. Before we see anything, we hear this unnerving soundtrack followed by the brilliant title sequence created by Saul Bass. The music helps take us into the narrative, set the tone, and install a sense of dread into the audience. When it was released, this is one of the darkest movies ever made, and the film score helped lure the audience into this world. Even in the opening credits we see this. We hear this unnerving music while seeing text being cut apart. This cues the audience into knowing that this is going to be a movie about murder. From here, the soundtrack lightens up and becomes more romantic, but at its heart, it still feels the same as the theme we just heard. Part of the reason why it sounds so familiar is that the entire soundtrack was composed only for the string section, which gives it a very stripped down feeling. Hermann said he wanted to use only strings to match the black and white color palette used in this film. After the opening hotel room scene, we don't hear the score until Marion decides to take the money. What this does is allow the audience to link the score with doing bad deeds. We are being conditioned to only hear the music when something bad is happening. When we see these characters have premarital sex, we hear a lighter version of it. When she decides to take the money, it becomes even more intense. The soundtrack in this movie exists to achieve two things above all else: to shape the viewer's thoughts on the morals of the movie and to build suspense. Once Marion is about to leave town and sees her boss, we hear the most intense score we have heard so far. It is at this moment that she realizes that there is no turning back. She is deciding to risk everything, and the music reflects that. We hear the score as we see her drive all day, reflecting how much this has been weighing on her. Although we don't actually see her drive for hours, we know that this has been very intense because of the soundtrack that is used. After she stops for the night on the side of the road, the police officer stops and questions her. At this point, the audience has no idea what is about to happen. But we do know that her situation is getting more and more dire, given another change in the soundtrack. As she progresses through her journey, the soundtrack becomes more and more shrill until she reaches Bates Motel. The first thing that we hear when she sees the Bates Motel sign is the theme, Ending. As I already mentioned, we have been conditioned to view things that are good without a score and things that are bad with a score, and the moment that Marion arrives in Bates Motel, the music stops, in a way tricking us into thinking that this is a safe and good place. In fact, the next time we hear the soundtrack is right after Norman leaves to get dinner and Marion is thinking about where to hide the money.
And I'll be back as soon as it's ready.
Okay.
With my trusty umbrella.
This is Hitchcock hiding the message of the movie almost entirely. Throughout the first half of the film, there is a lot of emphasis put on the money. There are both audio and visual cues that yell at us, this money is important. This makes it so that we don't look at Norman as a threat. We think that he's just an awkward and kind of unusual guy, and as long as the money is safe, the narrative should follow suit, and the characters should be safe as well. He also uses music, or the lack thereof, to make us think about the relationship Norman has with his mother is just another small detail.
Oh, I refuse to speak of disgusting things because they disgust me. You understand, boy?
But what does this do? It subverts our expectations. While we are watching movies, and especially mystery movies like this, we are trying to figure out what is going on and what is going to happen next. Hitchcock, of course, knows this, and he focuses our attention on small details. He sets up the entire first act of this movie to depend on the money. But in the end, the money doesn't have any real impact on the narrative itself. When we see that the money isn't involved in a scene, and when we hear that there isn't any music, we put our guard down. For example, in the infamous shower scene, let's look right before that. We see her calculating how much money she has left, while in the background, we hear the music. Right after that, we learn that she still has the majority of the money, and the music stops. It looks like she is going to be safe. We, as the audience, assume that she is safe and put our guard down. But as we soon learn, that isn't even remotely true. When the music plays in this moment, it exists as a way to supplement the visuals. Originally, Hitchcock intended this scene to be played without music. Take a look or a listen at what it sounds like that way. Not very interesting, but listen to what it sounds like when Bernard Hermann scores it. Obviously, this specific cut was based around the soundtrack, but the soundtrack makes the scene so much more intense. We never see the knife pierce any skin, we never see anything at all really, but with a combination of editing that makes sense in the soundtrack, we were able to piece everything together. Every shrill note that we hear is supposed to be the equivalence of a blade entering the body. The soundtrack in this movie is essential to building up tone, atmosphere, and making Psycho one of the best horror movies of all time. From beginning to end, the soundtrack helps supplement the movie and makes it fantastic. But it is worth mentioning that the soundtrack alone isn't what makes the movie great. The exact same soundtrack as a faithful re-recording was used in the 1998 remake or adaptation of the original movie. There are hours worth of discussion when comparing the original and the remake, but I think that this really shows that at the end of the day, no matter how great any tool of filmmaking is, be that cinematography, editing, performances, or of course the score, it only works well when the rest of the movie is working together. Hitchcock was able to put everything together, the story, the suspense, the plot twists, and join it with the score to make a movie that is truly great. Thank you very much for watching. Psycho is right up there as one of the best movies of all time, and this is one of the best soundtracks of all time. The collaboration between Hitchcock and Hermann resulted in some pretty phenomenal movies, and this is a perfect example of one of those. Next week we are going to be continuing to look at horror with Eraserhead. That video is going to be out next Saturday, and there's a link to that video on the right of the screen. On the left is my last video where we covered Black Swan. Thanks for watching, and I will see you guys next week.